first thing to do is to conduct the data mining. Okay, so in today's business environment, so we know how valuable the data is, okay, or uh, how important gathering data and storing data is in our day-to-day operations. So actually, information nowadays is considered an asset. Okay, so a very valuable assets. Okay, so just like a mga precious stones or precious metals, so the data is mo-undergo gina siya og process gyapon to to further refine the data and make it relevant to the decision makers. So so it's not enough that we just gather data. We have to polish the data. We have to clean the data and store it in a very uh, secure environment. Okay? Or at least dili basta-basta maka-access ang bisag kinsa. So data mining is the use of the statistical techniques to search the large data to search large data sets to extract and analyze data in order to discover the previously unknown useful patterns, trends, and relationships within the data that go beyond simple analysis and that can be used to make decisions. So, all businesses gather data from their transactions. So, each time a customer buys, so dapat na sila uh, recorded niya data about ana. So kano sa nagpalit, um, unsay gipalit niya, the gender, the connection, if it is an employee or student, okay? Because probably the data maybe dili pa siya kuan sa ato dili pa siya relevant. But once we process the data and discover patterns, so for example sa 7-Eleven, so it is noticed nga ang mga estudyante ang kusog mo palit og snacks compared sa employees. Okay, so we can so because of this information we can probably um, devise or we will have an idea on saan na to pag-advertise. Okay, so that is very catchy or attractive to the market closest to those products. So data mining is an iterative process. So balik-balik na siya buhaton until it becomes very refined and very useful. So perhaps sa data nga ilang nag-gather, so every time nga ang estudyante magpalit og siopaw, nagyunay kauban niya nga juice or coffee. So you cannot only thus in marketing dili lang isa ka product ang imong i-market but the complementary product, okay? Or the product nga will probably accompany the snacks. Data mining is a process with defined steps. So since data mining has a series of steps, uh, it is it is a science. However, aside from being a science, data mining is also an art because in data mining, decisions must be made regarding what data to use, what tools to use, and what algorithms to use. So it is an art because it depends on the management or whoever's in charge of the recording of data. What data ang i-record, how will the data be useful, so what tools to use, kung manual ba siya kapag gather or perhaps ibutang sa system, o ibutang sa database, or perhaps naa sa computer files, nasa Excel. So nakadepende. So it's not only the what data ang ilang gina-record or ilang ginagamit, but also the use of data in the gathering in and storing and controlling the data. So of course, not data is useful to everyone in the organization. So for example, uh, the salaries of the employees, perhaps. So you may want to know the salaries of your teachers, but as to the usefulness, so of course it's not useful to you. Okay. So the data nga is probably very much useful sa inyo are the grades. So data mining is used in the predictive analytics. So if you recall the predictive analytics, so it's actually understanding the patterns and trend so that we can use the variable to forecast. Okay. So for example, the price of the product, so it could be used as a predictor for the quantity demand for the product. So in data mining, so it attempts to analyze the data, understand if there are patterns or trends or relationship with other data, so that those refined nga data, or if there is an established connection between those variables, so we can use those as our predictor or to forecast. So basic concepts of predictive analytics include the classification. So that's the first, the concept. So data analysis involves classification such as whether a customer will purchase or not purchase. So for this product, who are the usual customers? Prediction is similar to classification, but the goal is to predict the numerical value of variables such as the amount of a purchase rather than simply classifying customers as predicted purchasers or predicted non-purchasers. So for this particular product, so sa classification, it will only answer the question whether uh, let's say ang student mo purchase ba siya ani nga product or dili. However, for prediction, it's more than that. It's more than classification kay aside from classifying whether mo purchase or dili, it also answers the question kung mo purchase man gali, pilay amount. Okay? Association rules, so it is also called the affinity analysis. So association rules are used to find patterns or association between items in the large databases, such as associations among items purchased from a retail store or what goes with what. Okay, so all businesses, although at sa pagkakaroon dili pa mag-make sense ang mga data nila, but later on pag ilan na nang i-further mine or i-clean and refine, then diha na nila may bawaan ang association or pattern sa ilang mga data. So for example, all of you are uh, naghatag mo og data sa OPIS. So your name, your blood type, your whatever, your address, your um, your cell phone number, your email address. So all of those data are captured upon enrollment. Okay? So naana siya tanan sa ato ang OPIS, and then um, it is the ITSD who will determine kung unsa nga data ang ang relevant for the registrar, for the faculty, um, for the management, and so on. So for example, for enrollment nga data or statistics, so every semester release man na siya. So which of the program ang taas og enrollment, okay, which program are ang nag-down ang enrollment, okay? So i-analyze po na siya sa management. Online recommendation systems. So in contrast to the association rules, so ang association rules mong good is applied generally. So entire population ng iyang application. So online recommendation systems use the collaborative filtering to deliver personalized recommendations to user. So collaborative filtering generates rules for what goes with what. Okay, so what goes with what to the individual user level. So sama sa akong giingon gain na, so for example, namatikdan sa 7-Eleven nga kasagaran magpalit sa ilang siopaw ug buns are the students. So and then they could also analyze kung after buying the siopaw and the hotdog bun, unsay pares ana nila. Okay, unsa dayoy sunod niya paliton sa mga students. So kana siya, it's more on general conclusion, okay, or more general observation. But in the online recommendation systems, so it mas individual pag yun. Okay? So meaning, so kanis student A, okay? Or kanis student nga with student ID number nga inani. Unsay usual niya nga ginapalit, okay? So so for example, siopaw kasagaran niya paliton is kape. Okay, unsa nga flavor. So mas individual ang pagka-analyze compared sa association which is more general. So data reduction is the process of consolidating a large number of records into a smaller set by grouping the records into homogeneous groups. So for example, upon enrollment, so daghan kay estudyante. So lahi-lahi og program, lahi-lahi og uh, data set. So of course, it needs to be consolidated. So it needs to be reduced. So for example, so na ay naka-file nga records for only for the accountancy students, okay, for management accounting students, AIS, and the internal audit students. So from a big data group, so it becomes smaller. Clustering is discovering groups in data sets that have similar characteristics without using known structures in the data. So actually sa data reduction, so mas kuan pa gyud si clustering, mas gigroup pa gyud siya into smaller set. So this time naay mga mas similar ang ilang characteristics. So for example, sa data reduction, pwedeng all students in the accountancy program. So in the clustering, mas ikuan pa gyud na siya, i-group pa gyud into similar characteristics. So let's say group for the account BSA, group for the BSMA, BS Internal Audit, and BS Accounting Information System. And then we have the dimension reduction. So it entails reducing the number of variables in the data before using it for data mining in order to improve its manageability, interpretability, and predictive ability. So, so dimension reduction, so katong clusters gaina, pwede pa gyud na siya nimo subdivide so that it becomes more manageable. So let's say for BSA, so mas gi-divide pa siya into year levels. So first year, second year, third year, and fourth year. So same with other courses. So first year, second year, third year, fourth year, so that it can still be uh, reduced to the level nga pwede nimo siya himuan og uh, decision. Okay? So let's say sa mga first year, accountancy, so who among them is the possible number nga mutik sa qualifying exam? O perhaps sa third year karon, uh, tayo ang di nag-forecast kung pila possible mo graduate by next year. So of course the data nga relevant lang sa ila is the third year nga number of students, not the first year, second year, kaya di pa man sila mo graduate by next year. So it becomes more manageable. You can interpret more and um, there is a more predictive value. So next is the data exploration. So it is used to understand the data and detect the unusual values. So the analyst explores the data by looking at each variable individually and looking at relationships between and among the variables in order to discover patterns in the data. So sa data exploration, so it attempts to study individually all the variable. So although all of you sa tanan ba third year students, tanan ba sila nakakompleto na sa requirements? Okay? So kinsay posible maka dili pa mo graduate by next year, perhaps kulang pa sa units or napay other problems. So so it attempts to detect some mga unusual values. Then data visualization is the use of graphs, mga histograms, charts, mga pie graphs para mas ma-visualize pag-ayo or mas masabtan pag-ayo ang data. So that is why if you observe in the kanang mga salida, so let's say mga sales nga data, so it is always presented in a visual form. So perhaps in the form of a line chart or bar graph. So mas dali siya pasabot. So what is the difference between the supervised and unsupervised learning? So in the supervised learning algorithm, so it is used in the prediction. So it is used in the classification and also in the prediction. So in order to train the algorithm, it is necessary to have a data set in which the value of the outcome to be predicted is already known, such as whether or not the customer made a purchase. So the data set with known outcome is called the training data because the data set is used to train the algorithm. So the data in the data set is called label data because it contains the outcome value for each record. So ang in the supervised learning algorithm, so first ana niya, tanan data is captured in one database, okay, or one file of the data. And then from there, so panid-an or obserbaran, okay, so let's say ang ginaobserbahan sa school is to know kung unsay percentage sa mga students ang mupadayon until fourth year. Okay, so based on the past or mga historical records nila, so let's say they found out nga it's from students who enrolled in first year. So pag abot sa fourth year, let's say 30% na lang. So they can use that as a predictor nga pilay mo graduate each year based on the number of first year enrollees enrolled kada tuig. So it's just an example. Another example is the linear regression. So it is an example of a basic supervised learning algorithm. So the x variable, which is also known as the independent variable, it serves as the predictor variable. So let us say the x variable is the price and y variable is the quantity or the demand. So the dependent variable is the outcome variable. So outcome variable. So nakadepende sa price ang quantity demand. In the training and test data where the y value for each x value is known. So the regression line is drawn so that it minimizes the sum of the square deviations between the actual y and predicted by the regression line. Then the regression line is used to predict the y values that will result for new values of x for which the y values are unknown. So in your cost accounting, so we have discussed mga high-low method, least squares, okay, and also the scatter graph. So in the linear regression or in the squared or in the least squares, so although daghay data points in the graph, but we draw a line that possibly fit, okay, that possibly fit sa daghan kayo nga mga dots. And that line is what we call the regression line. So we use the regression line to predict the values of the variable, let's say variable cost and the fixed cost. So for example, for the price and the quantity demand, so we have noticed nga every time nga we increase the price, it has an impact to the quantity demand. So mo decrease siya. So therefore, we can use that as a predictor. So kung magpa-increase tag price karon nga tuig, expected yun na nga mo down ang ato ang quantity demand. Or vice versa, let's say nagpaubos kag price. You want to increase the sales so you can decrease the price. So it can increase the quantity demand. The unsupervised learning algorithms are used when there is no outcome variable to predict or classify. So association rules, dimension reduction, and clustering are unsupervised learning methods. So we just observe the patterns, but there is no conclusive evidence nga it can be used as a predictor. Okay, so let's first say sa clustering, we just classify people or we just group the data. On the association rules, so we just identify which customers are possibly who will buy or not sa product. Okay, so now let's talk about the neural networks in data mining. So the neural networks are systems that can recognize patterns in data and use those patterns to make predictions using no data. So as you observe in data mining, so ang iyang goal ragyod is to find the patterns and relationships of all those data nga na-gather. So some examples of the neural networks include the first, picking of stocks for investment by performing technical analysis of financial markets and individual investment holdings. So in technical analyzing is actually the observation of the price. Okay, so mo ni kasagaran price and then pag moabot siya sa price nga kasagaran mo na pinakaubos, so mopalit na dayon ang investor and then isell na pod niya sa point or sa price nga usually gasell ang mga investors. So it's an example of a neural network. Second is making bankruptcy predictions. So based on the financial statements, based on the operations of the management, so they can possibly predict whether it will go bankrupt or not. Third is detecting fraud in the credit card and other monetary transactions. So what are the possibility reasons why people commit fraud in credit card and who usually does this? Identifying digital image. So for example sa inyong cellphones, 'di ba? So if nagamit mo og katong inyong facial recognition, that's an example of a neural network. Or if you use your thumb mark, or no, not thumb mark. If you use your fingerprint to open your cell phone, then that system uses the neural network. So it analyzes the data, the digital image, for example, a fingerprint or your face, Self-driving vehicles also use the neural networks with cameras on the vehicle as the inputs. So what are the steps in data mining? So just like sa kanang mga ore or mining ore, so 'di ba medyo hugaw pa na siya, so it needs to be processed. So just like a data, it needs to undergo several steps before it can be become useful in the decision making. So first is to understand the purpose of the project. So what is the purpose why we are gathering the data? For what? Or is it continuous or for fixed lang nga reason or for one time lang nga decision making? Second is to select the data set to be used. So after finding out the purpose, so just like in your thesis, 'di ba? So you have to understand first the purpose of your project or what you are trying to study all about. And from there, you can now select your data set nga inyong i-gather. So probably you can do this by reading a lot of review of related literatures. So, and then you explore, clean, and pre-process the data. So from your review of related literature, you can come up with your own synthesis or analysis on how are you going to gather the data. So reduce the data dimension if needed, which are your respondents. So asa na nimo kwaon nga data, specifically unsa nga mga group sa tao or group sa business or whatever. Next is determine the data mining task. How are you going to gather the data? Okay. Is it through questionnaires or surveys, observations, etc.? Then next is partition the data. So sa tanang data imo na gather, then you come up with the summary or the results of your data gathering, and then you group them according to the relevance, and then select the data mining techniques to use. So how are you going to process the data further? Are you going to use the correlational or perhaps the case study method? Okay. So in short, how are you going to synthesize all the data nga inyong na-gather? Then you can use the algorithms to perform the task. It could be manual or you can use softwares. And then after that is the interpretation of the results. So if you can now interpret the results based on your study, so pwede na siya gamiton to predict the future nga mga decision making. Let's say you are studying the impact of the online learning to the students, if it is effective or not, or more effective or not than the face-to-face class. So based sa inyong depende sa inyong resulta, then you can come up with a conclusion and help the management, let's say the educational institution, as to unsay resulta sa inyong study and whether it is good or bad for the students, or if it is good, pwede pa ba na siya ma-improve. Okay? So now you can now deploy the model. So there are studies that can actually result into model. Let's say katong Abraham's Maslow of hierarchy. So 'di ba? There's is a pyramid of the needs of the persons or humans nga dapat ma-satisfy first before you go to the other level of needs. So that's why people should first satisfy their physiological needs, such as the food and water, before they look for other needs or look for the satisfaction of other needs, such as the security, the self-actualization, self-esteem, and so on. So So in short, you can come up with a model that can be used for decision making or for the for the next nga mga kuan way of deciding. So these models, kung mathematics pa ni siya, these are some of the formulas that were uh, discovered and invented by our scientists. Okay, so data mining also have its own challenges. So these are the barriers in conducting the data mining. So first challenge is if the data is if the data quality is poor. So especially if the data nga na-gather is dili siya accurate or dili siya tinuod, so it could result into um, poor nga results. So poor results can become I can if used by the management could lead to poor decisions. Second challenge, the information exists in multiple locations within the organization. So especially if the organization is not the data is not centralized. So meaning each customer um, pwede sa lain-lain nga opisina magsige siya og fill out sa iyang data. So they don't have a single database na ginagamit. So just imagine if the enrollment is not centralized or the wala tay OPIS. So meaning upon enrollment, mag-fill out kag form sa registrar, pag-abot sa accountancy, mag-fill out na sa kag form sa accountancy, sa library, sa admission and student affairs, sa guidance, since we don't have a centralized database, so inana ang may tabo. So the information can exist in multiple location. So luckily for us, because we have a one large database that can be accessed by a lot of offices. So upon entering your data in the OPIS, pwede na siya gamiton sa registrar, sa program, and other offices. The third challenge of data mining is there are biases or the biases can be amplified in evaluating data. So for example, nagkanda kag study sa effectiveness of the online learning to the students and you're one of the students. So of course, uh, mas kusog ang bias, 'di ba? If you are one of the students or perhaps if you are the teacher, so nagyapon na siya bias. So most man good based on study, the findings of the study that results that amplifies your opinions. So usually mo na ang imong tuuhan. But if the data nga mugawas is not will not coincide with your perceived bias, so medyo lisod siya i-present, 'di ba? Lisod siya ipakita nga resulta. So that is why those who are conducting study, so you have to know your biases first before it can affect your interpretation of data. Fourth challenge is the analysis of data often displays correlations. So usually the kono, it only displays correlation, but it does not really uh, give us the cause and effect or the cause or the reason nga nung na sila correlation. Okay? So example ana sa correlation is um, probably those poor ang signal will lead to poor performance in the online class. So of course kana it could na causation, anay correlation, but we can also understand the relationship nganong inana ang resulta. Okay? But what if the data is inani? Okay? So those in Surigao has a better performance than those who are in Butuan during the online class. So kana dili pa klaro nato ang reason or what is the cause nga nung inana. So it needs further investigation because in the statistics, usually ang makita ra is the correlation but not really the cause and effect. So you have to establish before we can use the results of the correlation. So we have to establish first the relationship between two variables. Another challenge is the data privacy. So we know that we have a law, Data Privacy Act, that we have to make sure nga we are following that. So that's why every time we gather data, it always needs the consent of uh, the people. So dili ka basta-basta mukuha og data without asking their permission. Okay? Maski gani picture imong kawaton tapos i-post, okay? So pwede ka makihaan na because that is against the Data Privacy Act. So how much more kung mag-gather kag data nga without the permission or consent from those imong gikuha ag data. So another challenge is the data security. So a lot of this data can be hacked. Pwede ni siya ma-access, especially sa those who are experts. Pwede siya ma-corrupt. Okay? So pwede mawala. So that's one of the challenge. And then last challenge is the growing volume of the unstructured data. So if you recall the unstructured data, these are the information nga imong ni-gather by reading mga Facebook comments or other social media accounts, mga emails, telephone calls. Okay? So those who are really kuan, dili siya numbers imong magather but these are some of the comments, remarks from our customers and suppliers. Okay, so before we go, so I want you to answer this question first and then type it in the chat box. So it is the use of the statistical techniques to search large data sets to extract and analyze data in order to discover previously unknown, useful patterns, trends, and relationships within the data that go beyond simple analysis and that can be used to make decisions is called what? So I'll give you 1 minute to type your answers. After that, we will reveal the answer. All right, type in your answers. Okay, so I think most of you got the correct answer. So of course, that is data mining. Okay, so we're done with the lecture. So I will of course upload the recorded lecture video. So I will give you the link kung kanis ama I will give you the YouTube link kung asa siya pwede